I'm Lena Brooks, 36, a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force who worked her way up from a pretty ordinary childhood into a career I had to fight for. For years, I showed up for my uncle, supporting him, respecting him, shrinking myself so he could feel big. But the day he mocked me on his private jet, right before the system flagged my ID and two F-22s rolled up as my escort, something in me shifted. Have you ever been dismissed or belittled by someone you spent years giving to? If you have, share your story in the comments. Trust me, you're not going through it alone. Before we get into what really happened that day, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to push back after being underestimated, tap like and subscribe for more real stories about boundaries, self-respect, and taking your power back. What came next, even I didn't see it coming. I grew up wanting to earn things on my own. That instinct came partly from pride, partly from watching my parents stretch every dollar, and partly from knowing that my Uncle Daniel would remind us, with alarming regularity, that he'd helped us financially. Daniel Westbrook was my father's older brother, wealthy, charismatic, endlessly self-impressed. As a kid, I admired him because everyone else did. He owned successful companies, traveled constantly, and seemed to move through life with ease. My parents struggled. He stepped in occasionally with loans, gifts, advice, and always made sure we knew he was doing so. I didn't resent it exactly. I just learned early that owing someone something meant they owned a piece of your story. So I decided to write my own. The Air Force gave me that chance. I went through ROTC, commissioned as a second lieutenant, and moved through early assignments with focus and discipline. By 30, I was a captain working in a classified aviation testing program. To Daniel, though, I was just the kid who joined the Air Force. He never asked what I actually did, only joked that at least pilots get free flights. I let it slide because he was family. I visited him when I was home on leave, partly out of habit, partly because he treated me like a child who would be impressed by his success. I gave him loyalty, attention, patience during long lectures about business deals I didn't understand or care about. I helped him with small things when I could, tech issues, travel logistics, listening to his rants about incompetent business partners. I minimized his arrogance because he was family. I excused the imbalance. He talked, I listened. He took up space, I adapted. The bond was real, but uneven. And I'm only now willing to admit it. My parents never complained about Daniel. They were grateful for his help, even when it came with strings. My mother would say he means well whenever his tone crossed a line. My father would nod and change the subject. I learned to do the same. The thing about Daniel was that his generosity always felt transactional. He'd pay for dinner and then spend the entire meal talking about how much the restaurant cost. He'd lend money and bring it up casually months later, not as a reminder to repay, but as a reminder that he could afford to forget. I didn't fully understand how much I'd internalized that dynamic until I started rising through the ranks. My promotions were milestones to me, hard-earned, meaningful. To him, they were conversation fillers. When I made captain, he said, "That's great, kiddo. What's next, General?" He laughed. I didn't. But I didn't correct him either. I just smiled and let him move on to talking about his latest acquisition. Looking back, I see how much I gave him and how little he saw. I gave him respect for what he'd built. I gave him the benefit of the doubt when his jokes landed wrong. I gave him access to my time, my energy, my patience. What did I get? Performance. Mockery dressed up as humor. Outdated assumptions about who I was and what I was capable of. He never saw me. He saw a version of me that made him feel bigger. And I let him because I didn't know how to do anything else. By the time I hit my early 30s, I'd been promoted to major. It wasn't just a rank, it was validation. Years of work, sacrifice, discipline, and focus had paid off. I was proud. My parents were proud. Daniel congratulated me by saying, "Still not a general, huh?" He laughed. I forced a smile. That moment stuck with me longer than it should have. It wasn't the worst thing he'd ever said, but it crystallized something I'd been avoiding. Daniel didn't take me seriously. He never had. And maybe he never would. The balance between us wasn't just uneven, it was rigged. He held the power because he believed he did, and I'd never challenged that belief. I told myself it didn't matter. I had my career. I had my life. I didn't need his approval. But somewhere deep down, I still wanted it. I still wanted him to see me as more than the kid who used to follow him around the backyard. I wanted him to see me as an equal. That one kept me tethered to him longer than I should have been. It kept me accepting behavior I wouldn't tolerate from anyone else. It kept me small in a relationship that should have grown with me. And it set me up for what came next. As Daniel's businesses grew, so did his arrogance. He developed a louder sense of entitlement. People should move when he walked. Staff should anticipate needs he never voiced. The world owed him smoothness. He started speaking to me differently, too. Jokes about government workers who don't understand real money. Dismissive comments about my rank promotions being cute. When I made major in my early 30s, he congratulated me with, "Still not a general, huh?" I laughed it off. My mother's expression tightened across the table, but no one said anything. I told myself he was just being dramatic. That was Daniel. He'd always been larger than life, and that came with sharp edges. But something had shifted. His circle had changed. Venture capital guys, former athletes, influencers, people fascinated by wealth, not character. He absorbed their attitude, mock anything that doesn't make millions, dismiss anything that demands sacrifice. My career didn't fit his worldview. It required discipline, structure, delayed gratification. Things that didn't translate into Instagram posts or quarterly earnings. He began rewriting history casually, telling others he guided me into the Air Force, that I used to rely on him to pay for things. Small distortions that painted him as my architect. I heard these stories secondhand from relatives who thought they were complimenting him. Each time, I felt something tighten in my chest. But I didn't confront him. I told myself it wasn't worth the conflict. One Thanksgiving, he joked at the table that I flew toy jets while he flew real ones. Everyone laughed. I did too, because that's what you do. But my mother's face went still. She didn't laugh. She looked at me with something close to apology. I brushed it aside. He'd always been dramatic. But it lingered. The distance between us wasn't growing because I changed. It grew because he couldn't imagine me being anything other than the kid who used to follow him around. His perception of me was frozen in time, and every achievement I earned only seemed to irritate him. Like I was breaking character. I started noticing smaller things. The way he interrupted me mid-sentence to finish my thoughts, incorrectly. The way he'd ask about my work and then zone out before I finished answering. The way he'd steer every conversation back to himself within minutes. It wasn't malicious. It was reflexive. He genuinely couldn't hold space for someone else's story if it didn't serve his. I watched him do it to others too. Wait staff. Business associates. Even his own employees. He treated people like props in his narrative. Useful when needed, invisible when not. And I realized with uncomfortable clarity that I'd been a prop too. I'd been the grateful niece. The one who owed him. The one who made him feel generous and wise. The more successful I became, the less that role fit. And instead of adjusting his view of me, he tried to squeeze me back into the old frame. It didn't work. I was too different now. Too independent. Too sure of my own worth. But I didn't know how to tell him that without shattering the fragile peace we'd maintained for years. So I stayed quiet. I smiled through the jokes. I let him dominate conversations. I told myself it was easier this way. That he was family. That I didn't need his approval anyway. But the truth was simpler and harder. I was afraid. Afraid of conflict. Afraid of disappointing my parents. Afraid of being the one who broke the family dynamic. So I absorbed his arrogance and minimized my discomfort. I made myself smaller so he could stay big. And every time I did, I lost a little more respect for both of us. He invited me to fly with him on his private jet for a short domestic hop. Family time, he said. I accepted because it had been a while, and I was passing through on leave. I didn't think much of it. A quick flight, a chance to catch up. Maybe he'd ask about my work for once. The moment I stepped aboard, he smirked. This is an economy. Don't touch anything. He said it loudly in front of his crew. A performance. It embarrassed me more than it should have. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the intent behind them. He wanted me to feel small. In front of strangers. I forced a smile and took a seat near the back. The crew moved efficiently, professional and quiet. One of them, the pilot, approached with a tablet. "Ma'am, I need to scan your ID." Standard procedure. I handed him my CAC, my military ID card. He scanned it. The screen flashed red. Hard red. The pilot stiffened. He stared at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. "Is Valkyrie 1 correct?" he asked quietly. I nodded. My uncle scoffed from across the cabin. "She's in the Air Force, not the Avengers." The pilot didn't laugh. He stepped away, tablet in hand, and spoke into his radio. Low, urgent. I knew what was happening. My stomach dropped. The system had flagged me as asset restricted. I was attached to a classified aviation testing program, and certain protocols applied when I traveled. Protocols I didn't control. The pilot returned, his face carefully neutral. "Ma'am, we need to hold for a moment." Daniel stood. "Hold? What are you talking about?" "Sir, I need you to step back." The pilot's tone left no room for argument. Daniel's face flushed. "This is my plane. I'm not stepping anywhere." The pilot ignored him and spoke into his radio again. Moments later, the cabin door opened. A security officer stepped inside, followed by two others. They moved with quiet authority, positioning themselves near the exits. Then I heard it. The low, unmistakable rumble of jet engines. Not from inside the plane. From outside. Daniel moved to the window. His face went pale. Two F-22 Raptors taxied near the tarmac, engines low but purposeful. They weren't there by accident. The security officer approached me. "Ma'am, your escort is here." Daniel's mouth fell open. He looked at me, then at the officer, then back at the Raptors. "Escort." His voice cracked. "What the hell is going on?" The officer didn't answer him. He addressed me. "We'll need to transfer you to a secure transport. This flight can't proceed as scheduled." I nodded. I stood. Daniel grabbed my arm. "Lena, what is this?" I pulled my arm free gently but firmly. "It's protocol, Daniel." "Protocol for what?" His voice rose. "You're a pilot. You fly planes. Why do you need fighter jets?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The officer gestured toward the door. I followed him. Behind me, I heard Daniel shouting at the pilot, demanding answers. The pilot's response was calm and final. "Sir, that's classified." I stepped off the plane and onto the tarmac. The Raptors sat there, engines humming, canopies closed. Two crew members stood nearby, waiting. The officer handed me off to them, and they escorted me toward a waiting SUV. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what Daniel's face looked like right now. Confused. Betrayed. Humiliated. Like I'd tricked him simply by growing up. The drive to the secure transport was silent. I stared out the window, processing what had just happened. It wasn't about the escort. It wasn't about the jets. It was about the moment Daniel realized he didn't know me at all. That the version of me he'd kept in his head, the grateful, dependent niece, had never been real. Not for years. And the truth of who I'd become had just landed on him like a freight train. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief. Anger. Sadness. But mostly clarity. This was always going to happen. The gap between who I was and who he thought I was had been widening for years. It was only a matter of time before something forced him to see it. I just didn't think it would happen on a tarmac, with two F-22s as witnesses. That night, I sat alone in a temporary quarters on base, replaying the day in my head. The humiliation on Daniel's face. The confusion. The anger. He demanded answers from the pilot, from the security officer, from anyone who would listen. But classification walls are non-negotiable. No one told him anything. And that, I realized, was what bothered him most. Not that I had protection. Not that I was part of something significant. But that he'd been left out. That there was a part of my life he couldn't access, couldn't control, couldn't reshape into a story about himself. I called Colonel Sarah Prescott, a friend and mentor I'd worked with on previous assignments. She picked up on the second ring. "Lena, you okay?" I told her what happened. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, people don't like losing the version of you that made them feel big. It hit me like a punch. That was it. That was the entire dynamic in one sentence. Daniel didn't resent my success. He resented losing the power imbalance. For years, I'd been the one who needed him, or at least, that's what he believed. I was the kid who looked up to him, the one who owed him, the one whose achievements he could frame as extensions of his guidance. But I'd outgrown that role, and he couldn't accept it. So what do? I asked. Sarah's response was immediate. You stop making yourself small to make him comfortable. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. How many years had I spent doing exactly that? Minimizing my work so he didn't feel threatened. Laughing off his jokes so he didn't feel challenged. Accepting his version of me so he didn't have to confront the truth. I'd given him loyalty, patience, and grace for years. What had he given me? Performance. Mockery. Outdated assumptions. The bond wasn't mutual. It was historical. And history wasn't enough anymore. I thought about my mother's face at Thanksgiving when he joked about toy jets. The way she looked at me with quiet apology, like she knew the comment was wrong but didn't know how to say it. I thought about every time I'd bitten my tongue. Every time I'd redirected a conversation away from conflict. Every time I'd let him rewrite history because it was easier than correcting him. And I realized I'd been complicit. Not in his arrogance, that was his alone. But in the illusion that it was okay. That it didn't matter. That I could just absorb it and move on. I couldn't anymore. Something had shifted. Maybe it was the jets. Maybe it was seeing the look on his face when he realized he didn't know me. Maybe it was Sarah's voice in my head, reminding me that I didn't owe anyone my smallness. Whatever it was, it crystallized into a decision. I wasn't going to do this anymore. I wasn't going to minimize myself. I wasn't going to let him speak to me, or about me, the way he had been. And I wasn't going to apologize for outgrowing him. The next morning, I texted him. We need to talk. His response was immediate. About what happened yesterday. That was ridiculous. You could have warned me. I stared at the message. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just defensiveness. I typed back, your comment on the jet was unacceptable. I won't allow you to speak to me that way. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then, you're overreacting. I put the phone down. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The next morning, Daniel called. I didn't answer. He called again an hour later. Then he texted, can we please talk like adults? I almost laughed. We hadn't talked like adults in years. That was the problem. I waited until the afternoon, then called him back. He answered immediately. Lena. Thank God. Look, yesterday was unacceptable, I said. That's the word I'd use. He paused. I was joking. You know how I am. I do. That's the problem. He exhaled sharply. So what, you're mad at me now? Over a joke? It wasn't a joke, Daniel. You wanted to embarrass me in front of your crew. And you did. Silence. Then, that's not what I was doing. Then what were you doing? More silence. I could hear him shifting, the rustle of fabric. He was uncomfortable. Good. I didn't expect all that, he said finally. The jets. The security. You never told me you were involved in something like that. You never asked what I did. I did ask. No. You asked what ship I worked on. You assumed I was low level. You've been assuming that for years. He tried to interrupt, but I kept going. You've spent the last decade treating me like a kid. Dismissing my work. Rewriting history to make yourself the center of my story. And the moment you realized you were wrong, you got angry. Not at yourself. At me. That's not fair. It's accurate. He was quiet for a long time. Then, I helped you, Lena. I helped your family. You wouldn't be where you are without me. And there it was. The trump card. The thing he'd been holding onto for years. I took a breath. You did help us. And we were grateful. But gratitude doesn't mean I owe you my smallness. It doesn't mean you get to treat me however you want. I don't, yes. You do. My voice was calm, but firm. You talk over me. You dismiss my work. You make jokes at my expense. And when I finally set a boundary, you bring up old favors like I'm supposed to stay quiet because of them. He didn't respond. I'm not doing this anymore, I said. If you want to be in my life, you need to treat me with respect. Adult to adult. Not elder to child. Not creditor to debtor. Equals. And if I don't? His voice was sharp now, defensive. Then we don't have a relationship. The line went quiet. I could hear him breathing. Then, without another word, he hung up. I sat there, phone in hand, staring at the screen. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From relief. I'd finally said it. I'd finally drawn the line. And it felt like breaking the surface after being underwater for too long. An hour later, my mother called. Lena, what happened? Daniel just left. He said he needed space. I told her. Not everything, some of it was classified. But enough. She listened. When I finished, she sighed. He means well, honey. Does he? She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, he's been good to us. I know. But that doesn't give him the right to treat me like I'm still 12. She was silent. I could feel her discomfort through the phone. Mom, I'm not asking you to pick sides. I'm just asking you to understand that I can't do this anymore. I know, she said softly. I don't want the family to fall apart. It won't. But it has to change. She didn't argue. But I could hear the worry in her voice. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet and let the weight of it settle. I'd set a boundary. A real one. And it had cost me something. Maybe it would cost me more. But I couldn't go back. I wouldn't. Weeks passed. Daniel didn't reach out. Neither did I. My parents mentioned him occasionally, carefully, like they were walking on glass. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. I heard through my mother that he was stressed. That work was difficult. That he'd been short-tempered with staff. None of it surprised me. His world had cracked, and he didn't know how to fix it. Friends had teased him about the jet incident. Word had spread, not details, but enough. Your niece needed fighter jet escorts, someone had joked at a dinner party. He'd laughed it off, but my mother said he'd left early. His temper flared more easily now. Impatience with people who used to amuse him. Overreactions to minor inconveniences. The illusion of control had cracked, and he was scrambling to reassert it. But I wasn't there to absorb it anymore. I'd stepped back. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just completely. Calls went to voicemail. Texts got brief, polite replies. I wasn't punishing him. I was protecting myself. My work continued. I moved through assignments with sharper focus, better sleep, more patience with my team. Without the weight of managing Daniel's ego, I had energy for other things. Running before sunrise. Quiet coffee on my balcony. Calling friends without feeling guilty about time. Small joys I'd forgotten I liked. I also started noticing patterns I'd missed before. How much I'd minimized myself in other relationships. How often I'd accepted less than I deserved because it was easier than conflict. Daniel wasn't the only person I'd been too patient with. He was just the loudest example. I started setting boundaries elsewhere. With colleagues who expected me to cover for their mistakes. With relatives who treated my time as infinitely flexible. With anyone who assumed my kindness meant I had no limits. It felt strange at first. Uncomfortable. Like I was being difficult. But slowly, it started to feel normal. And then, it started to feel right. One evening, I was reviewing flight logs in my quarters when my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. I've been thinking. Can we talk? I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me was curious. I didn't respond right away. I waited. Let him sit with the uncertainty the way I'd sat with his dismissals for years. 2 days later, I replied. Okay. We met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between his place and the base. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in the corner, looking smaller than I remembered. I sat down across from him. He didn't smile. Neither did I. Thanks for meeting me, he said. I nodded. He shifted in his seat. I've been thinking about what you said. And? You were right. About some of it. Some of it. I almost stood up right there. But I stayed. I didn't realize I was. He trailed off, searching for the word. Dismissive. Dismissive, I repeated. He nodded. Yeah. I thought I was just joking around. I didn't think it bothered you. It did. I see that now. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he said, I'm sorry. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything I wanted to hear. But it was something. Thank you, I said. He looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years. You've done well, Lena. Really well. I didn't know how to say that without sounding like I was taking credit. I let that sit. Then I said, you don't get credit. But you don't need to. You can just be proud of me without making it about you. He nodded slowly. I can try. That's all I'm asking. He did try. Not perfectly. Not consistently. But more than before. Conversations were shorter. More careful. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He stopped bringing up old favors. He stopped rewriting history. When he slipped, and he did, he caught himself more often than not. Sorry. Old habit. I appreciated the effort. But I didn't let my guard down. Trust takes longer to rebuild than it does to break. We weren't close. Not the way we used to be. But we weren't estranged either. It was something in between, deliberate, cautious, healthier. My mother was relieved. She didn't say it outright, but I could tell. She started mentioning him less anxiously, less like she was managing a fragile truce. My father, who'd stayed mostly quiet through the whole thing, pulled me aside one afternoon. You did the right thing, he said. With your uncle. I looked at him, surprised. He shrugged. He needed someone to tell him. I'm glad it was you. That meant more than I expected it to. Over the next months, life stabilized. I made lieutenant colonel. My work deepened. I slept better. My schedule opened up. I invested more in friendships, training, actual rest. Daniel stayed on the periphery, respectful, subdued, unsure. He sent occasional texts, but no demands. Our relationship felt like a room neither of us fully entered yet. And that was okay. I realized the biggest change wasn't him. It was me. I'd stopped lowering myself to make others comfortable. I'd stopped giving people more access than they'd earned. I'd stopped carrying other people's egos. One evening, after a long sortie, I sat in my car on base, engine off, watching the sun drop behind the flight line. I thought about the jet. The Raptors. Daniel's face. And I realized something I hadn't fully understood at the time. The moment he saw those jets wasn't just about him being wrong. It was about me finally being seen. Not as the version of me he'd kept in his head. Not as the kid who followed him around. But as the woman I'd actually become. Someone who'd earned rank, respect, responsibility. Someone who didn't need his approval to know her own worth. Someone who could set boundaries and survive the fallout. I sat there in the quiet, and for the first time in a long time, I felt proud. Not of what I'd done to him, but of what I'd done for myself. I'd stopped apologizing for outgrowing people. I'd stopped making myself small. And I'd stopped waiting for permission to take up space. If respect wasn't mutual, it wasn't respect. It was performance. And I was done performing. Over the next months, I felt lighter. Not because Daniel changed, but because I finally did. Small joys returned. Running before sunrise without checking my phone first. Quiet coffee on my balcony without the weight of unread messages. Calling friends without feeling guilty about time. Laughing easily without the background hum of tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Peace replaced something I hadn't named before, the constant, low-level management of someone else's ego. Without that burden, I had energy for things I'd set aside. I started reading again, actual books, not just briefs. I visited my parents without the dread of running into Daniel. I let myself be still without feeling like I should be doing something, fixing something, managing something. My work improved too. Sharper focus. Better sleep. More patience with my team. When you're not carrying someone else's weight, you move faster. I led with more clarity. I listened better. I noticed when my junior officers were struggling and actually had the bandwidth to help. I stopped bringing tension home from relationships that didn't deserve my energy. One afternoon, Captain Jenna Wu, one of my direct reports, knocked on my office door. "Ma'am, you seem different lately." I looked up from my desk. "Different how?" She hesitated. "Lighter." "I don't know." You just seem more you. I smiled. Thank you. She left, and I sat there, turning the comment over. More me. That was it, wasn't it? For years, I'd been editing myself, softening my edges, making space for people who didn't make space for me. I'd been trying to fit into a version of myself that other people preferred. The grateful niece. The patient one. The one who didn't make waves. But that wasn't me. Not really. The real me set boundaries. Called out disrespect. Refused to shrink. The real me didn't need to be smaller to make others feel bigger. And finally, I was letting her exist. I thought about Daniel less. When I did, it wasn't with anger or resentment. Just distance. Like a chapter I'd closed. He texted occasionally. Short messages. Hope you're well. Saw something that made me think of you. I responded politely but didn't linger. I didn't owe him more than that. One evening, months after everything, I got a message from him. Longer than usual. Proud of you, kid. I mean that. I stared at it for a while, waiting to feel something. Relief. Validation. Closure. But what I felt was quieter. Simpler. I realized I didn't need his validation anymore. I could accept it without shrinking. I could let it exist without letting it change me. I typed back, thanks, Daniel. And that was enough. I thought about the woman I used to be. The one who absorbed jokes at her expense. The one who minimized herself to keep the peace. The one who believed that patience meant enduring mistreatment. She wasn't weak. She was doing the best she could with the tools she had. But she didn't know yet that boundaries weren't cruelty. That walking away wasn't betrayal. That outgrowing people was part of growing up. I knew now. And I wasn't going back. One night, I stood on my balcony, looking out over the base. The flight line was quiet. The sky was clear. I thought about the jets. The tarmac. Daniel's face collapsing as he realized he didn't know me. And I smiled. Not because I'd humiliated him, but because that moment had been the truth finally breaking through. The truth that I wasn't his. I'd never been his. I was mine. And I'd earned every single thing I had, not because of him, not in spite of him, but entirely separate from him. Sometimes peace isn't something you find. It's something you stop giving away. I gave it away for years. To people who didn't deserve it. To dynamics that didn't serve me. To versions of myself that weren't real. And when I finally stopped, I found something better than peace. I found myself. That was the real victory. Not the rank. Not the jets. Not even the boundary I'd set. But the quiet, steady knowledge that I didn't need anyone's permission to be exactly who I was. I leaned against the railing, breathing in the night air, and let that knowledge settle. I was Lieutenant Colonel Lena Brooks. Call sign, Valkyrie 1. And I didn't need anyone to make me feel big. I already was. The exhale came gradually over weeks and months. Not a single moment of relief, but a slow unwinding of tension I hadn't fully recognized I was carrying. I stopped checking my phone anxiously. Stopped bracing for the next dismissive comment. Stopped managing a relationship that had never been balanced. I ran before sunrise most mornings now, the air cold and clean, my breath visible in the dark. I didn't think about Daniel during those runs. I thought about flight patterns, mission briefs, the structural integrity of new prototypes we were testing. I thought about my team and how Captain Wu had stepped up lately. I thought about coffee and whether I had time to make eggs. Small, ordinary things that felt newly significant because I had space for them. My balcony became a refuge. I'd sit there in the evenings with a book or just silence, watching the sky shift from blue to gold to black. No urgency. No performance. Just being. I called friends more often. Long conversations that wandered, that didn't have a point, that ended when they ended. I laughed more. Real laughter, not the careful kind you use to smooth over awkward moments. I felt lighter in my body, like I'd been holding tension in muscles I didn't know could relax. My work sharpened. I made decisions faster, communicated more clearly, led with more confidence. Major Lucas Brandt noticed. You've been on fire lately, ma'am. I smiled. Just focused. But it was more than focus. It was clarity. When you stop spending energy managing dysfunction, you have more to give where it matters. My team felt it too. Captain Wu told me I seemed more present. Chief Master Sergeant Aaron Holt said I was easier to read, that he could tell when I needed something before I asked. I took that as a compliment. Leadership isn't just about command. It's about trust. And trust requires presence. I started saying no more often. To extra duties that didn't align with my priorities. To social obligations that drained me. To people who wanted access without offering respect. It felt strange at first, almost rude. But no one reacted the way I feared they would. Most people just accepted it and moved on. The ones who didn't, who pushed back, who who demanded explanations, revealed themselves quickly. And I stopped giving them space in my life. I visited my parents more easily now. Without the weight of avoiding Daniel or managing his presence, I could just be their daughter. We had dinners that lasted hours. My mother talked more freely, laughed more. My father asked about my work with genuine curiosity, not the careful politeness he used to use. One evening, my mother said, "You seem happy, sweetheart." I thought about it. I am. Good. She squeezed my hand. You deserve that. I realized I'd spent years not believing that. Not consciously, but somewhere deep down. Like happiness was something I'd earn once I proved myself enough, once I made everyone else comfortable, once I fixed all the broken dynamics around me. But happiness wasn't a reward for good behavior. It was a choice. A boundary. A refusal to accept less than I deserved. And I'd finally chosen it. I thought about the jet often. Not with anger or embarrassment, but with a kind of bemused clarity. That moment had forced the truth into the open. It had stripped away the illusion Daniel had built and the one I'd helped maintain. And while it had been uncomfortable, even painful, it had also been necessary. Sometimes the truth is loud. Sometimes it arrives with fighter jets and flashing red screens and the sudden, undeniable evidence that you are not who someone thought you were. I didn't regret it. Not the boundary I'd set. Not the distance I'd created. Not the discomfort it caused. I regretted the years I'd spent shrinking. But I couldn't go back and fix those. I could only move forward differently. And I was. One Saturday afternoon, I was at the base gym when I ran into Colonel Sarah Prescott. She was leaving as I was arriving. "Lena, you look good." "Thanks. I feel good." She studied me for a moment, then smiled. "You did it." "Did what?" "Whatever you needed to do." I laughed. "Yeah, I guess I did." She clapped me on the shoulder. "Proud of you." Those words landed differently than they used to. I didn't need them. But I could receive them. I could let them exist without letting them define me. "Thanks, Sarah." She left, and I went inside, and I lifted weights until my muscles burned and my mind went quiet. Afterward, I sat in my car, sweaty and tired and completely at peace. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Proud of you, kid." I mean that. I stared at it for a long time, turning it over, examining it for subtext, for performance, for the subtle reclaiming of credit he used to weave into everything. But it seemed sincere, simple, and I realized something quietly powerful. I didn't need his validation. I'd spent years chasing it, minimizing myself to earn it, accepting crumbs of recognition like they were full meals. But I didn't need it anymore. I could accept it without shrinking. I could let it exist without letting it change me. I typed back, "Thanks, Daniel." And I meant it. Not because he'd given me something I needed, but because I could afford to be generous now. I had enough. Enough confidence. Enough self-respect. Enough clarity about who I was and what I was worth. I didn't need to withhold kindness to protect myself. I just needed to maintain boundaries. And I would. I put my phone away and started the car. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I drove home slowly, windows down, letting the cool air rush in. I thought about the woman I used to be. The one who absorbed jokes at her expense. The one who made herself small to make others big. The one who believed that loyalty meant enduring mistreatment. She wasn't weak. She'd been surviving. She'd been doing the best she could with the understanding she had. But she'd learned. She'd grown. And she'd finally given herself permission to take up space. I thought about the woman I was now. The one who set boundaries without apology. The one who walked away from dysfunction. The one who knew her worth and refused to negotiate it. I liked her. I was proud of her. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely, authentically myself. That night, I stood on my balcony one last time, looking out over the base. The flight line was quiet. The stars were bright. I thought about the jets, the tarmac, Daniel's face collapsing. And I felt nothing but gratitude. Not for him. For myself. For the moment I finally stopped performing. For the boundary I finally set. For the life I finally claimed. Sometimes peace isn't something you find. It's something you stop giving away. I gave it away for years. And when I finally stopped, I found something better. I found myself. Whole. Clear. Uncompromising. And I wasn't giving that away ever again. 15 years changes everything and nothing. I'm 51 now, a brigadier general with a star on each shoulder and a career that's taken me places I never imagined when I was that young captain stepping onto my uncle's private jet. The Air Force has shaped me, broken me down, and built me back up more times than I can count. I've led squadrons, overseen test programs that pushed the boundaries of what aircraft can do, made decisions that affected thousands of lives. I've earned every inch of this uniform. Every rank. Every responsibility. Every gray hair. Daniel is 73 now. Age has softened him in ways conflict never could. His businesses are mostly sold or handed off to managers. He travels less, talks less, listens more. The arrogance that used to fill every room he entered has faded into something quieter, not humility exactly, but acceptance. He's smaller now, physically and otherwise. His shoulders curve inward slightly. His voice doesn't boom the way it used to. He moves carefully, like someone aware of his own fragility. We rebuilt something over the years. Not the relationship we had before, that was never coming back, and I didn't want it to. But something new. Something deliberate. We have coffee every few months when I'm in town. We text occasionally, real conversations now, not performances. He asks about my work and actually listens. I ask about his life and actually care about the answer. It's not close, but it's real. And that's worth more than closeness built on lies. My parents are older too. My father is 82, my mother 79. They've slowed down considerably, but they're still sharp, still them. My father still reads 3 newspapers a day. My mother still tends her garden with obsessive precision. They're proud of me in a way they express more freely now, like they've finally given themselves permission to take credit for raising someone successful without worrying it sounds like bragging. I visit them more now. Not out of obligation, but because time feels finite in a way it didn't when I was younger. I've seen enough loss in the military to know how quickly people disappear. How suddenly the chance to say something passes. So I visit. I sit in their living room and drink tea I don't really want. I listen to stories I've heard a dozen times. I help my father with tech issues he could probably figure out himself if he had the patience. I watch my mother fuss over meals she insists on making even though I tell her we could order in. These moments used to feel like duties. Now they feel like privileges. Daniel comes up sometimes during these visits. My mother mentions him more freely now, without the careful tension she used to carry. Your uncle asked about you, she'll say, and it's just information, not a negotiation. My father will add something dry, he's getting old. Thinks he's 20 years younger than he is. We laugh. It's easy now. The jet incident has become family folklore. My mother's friends still ask about it occasionally, wide-eyed, like it's a movie plot. My mother tells the story with pride now, not anxiety. My daughter, she says, and there's weight in those words. Ownership. Not of me, but of her role in who I became. I let her have that. It's true anyway. My career reached heights I didn't dare imagine when I was younger. Brigadier General. 1 star. There aren't many women at this level and fewer still in aviation. I don't think about that every day, I can't, or I'd never get anything done, but sometimes it hits me. Usually when I'm addressing a room full of officers and I see a young woman in the back, watching me the way I used to watch the senior officers I admired. Eyes bright. Hungry. Trying to see herself in my position someday. I always make a point to talk to those young women afterward. Not to give them some grand speech about breaking barriers. They're tired of those. but to tell them something real. Something useful. You're going to have to set boundaries people won't like, I tell them. Do it anyway. Their faces shift when I say that. Relief, usually. Like I've given them permission for something they thought they weren't allowed to do. I think about younger me often. The one who absorbed jokes at her expense. The one who made herself small. The one who didn't know yet that boundaries weren't cruelty. I want to go back and tell her it gets better. That the discomfort of setting boundaries is temporary, but the cost of not setting them is permanent. That she'll lose some people along the way, but the ones she loses weren't really there to begin with. But I can't go back. None of us can. So I try to be the person I needed when I was younger. For the junior officers in my command. For the young women trying to navigate systems that weren't built for them. For anyone who's still learning that taking up space isn't selfish, it's survival. My career has taken me all over the world. I've been stationed in Germany, Japan, South Korea. I've worked on joint operations with NATO allies. I've sat in rooms where decisions were made that would never be made public, where the weight of responsibility felt like it might crush me, where I had to project certainty I didn't always feel. I've led men and women into situations where the margin for error was razor thin. I've made calls that saved lives and calls that cost them. That's the job. You don't get to lead without carrying that weight. But I've also experienced moments of pure, transcendent clarity. Flying at altitude, the world reduced to sky and instrument panels and the hum of engines. Watching a test flight succeed after months of failures. Seeing a junior officer I mentored make rank. Standing on a tarmac at dawn, coffee in hand, watching the sun come up over a flight line full of aircraft I helped design. Those moments don't erase the hard ones. But they balance them. They remind me why I do this. I've had relationships over the years. Some serious, some not. None of them stuck. Not because of the career, though that didn't help, but because I learned to recognize dysfunction early now. I learned to walk away before I got too invested. Some people call that self-protection. Others call it fear of commitment. Maybe it's both. I'm okay with that. I'd rather be alone and whole than partnered and diminished. I have friends, though. Real ones. Colonel Sarah Prescott retired 2 years ago, but we still talk weekly. She lives in Colorado now, hikes every day, sends me photos of mountains I'll probably never see in person. Major Lucas Brandt, now Colonel Brandt, commands a wing in Nevada. We grab dinner when our paths cross. Chief Master Sergeant Aaron Holt retired last year after 35 years of service. I flew out for his ceremony. We got drunk afterward and told stories that would horrify our PR department. These people know me. The real me. Not the rank. Not the accomplishments. Just me. That's rare. I protect it. I've also stayed close with Captain Jenna Wu, who's now a lieutenant colonel herself, stationed in Alaska. She calls me every few months to vent about the cold, about bureaucracy, about the same frustrations I dealt with at her rank. I listen. I validate. I remind her she's doing better than she thinks. Because someone did that for me once, and it mattered. Last year, I was invited to speak at the Air Force Academy graduation. It was a huge honor, something I'd never expected. I stood at that podium looking out at hundreds of young faces, so earnest and hungry and terrified and excited, and I remembered being them. 22 years old. Commissioning day. My parents in the audience, crying. My uncle there too, smiling in that proprietary way he used to, like I was his project coming to fruition. I didn't mention him in my speech. I didn't mention the jet incident. I talked instead about leadership, integrity, resilience. About the difference between authority and respect. About how the best leaders make people feel capable, not small. About how you can't lead others if you haven't learned to lead yourself. It was well received. Cadets came up afterward to shake my hand, to thank me, to ask questions. One young woman, barely 22, asked me how I handled people who didn't take me seriously. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said I stopped waiting for permission to be taken seriously. I just led. Eventually, they caught up or they didn't. Either way, I kept moving. She nodded, eyes bright. I hope she remembered that. A few months after that speech, Daniel called me. Not texted, called. Which was unusual. I answered, surprised. Lena, he said, and his voice sounded thin. strained. I need to tell you something. My stomach dropped. What's wrong? I'm sick, he said. Cancer. Pancreatic. The world tilted slightly. How bad? Bad enough. He exhaled. They're starting treatment, but the odds aren't great. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt genuine sadness. He was still my uncle, still family. Part of me felt that old, familiar distance, the protective wall I'd built 15 years ago and never fully taken down. I'm sorry, Daniel. What do you need? Nothing, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know. I wanted to tell you myself. We talked for a few more minutes. I told him I'd visit when I could. He told me not to rearrange my schedule. I told him I would anyway. When we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at nothing. I visited him 2 weeks later. He was thinner, grayer, but still himself. Still Daniel. We sat in his living room, a massive space filled with expensive furniture he barely used, and drank tea his housekeeper brought us. We talked about small things at first. The weather. His garden. My latest assignment. Then he said, I've been thinking about that day. The jet. I looked at him. Yeah. I was such an ass, he said. He didn't smile. I spent years being an ass to you, and I didn't even realize it. You realized it eventually. Too late, though. He shook his head. I wasted a lot of time being the wrong kind of man. I didn't argue. It was true. But I also said you changed. That counts for something. Does it? He looked at me, really looked at me. Do you forgive me? I thought about that question. I'd been asked it before, in different contexts. By junior officers who made mistakes. By friends who screwed up. By people who wanted absolution more than change. Daniel was different. He'd actually changed. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough. Yeah, I said. I do. His eyes got wet. He nodded and looked away, composing himself. We didn't talk about it again that visit. We didn't need to. Over the next 6 months, his condition worsened. I visited when I could, which wasn't as often as I wanted. The demands of my job don't pause for personal crises. But I called regularly. I checked in. I made sure he knew I was there. My parents visited him more frequently. My mother cooked meals he barely touched. My father sat with him and watched sports, providing the kind of silent companionship men of their generation excel at. Daniel's friends visited too, though less often as he declined. People are uncomfortable around dying. They don't know what to say. They worry about saying the wrong thing. So they stay away, and the person dying gets lonelier. I didn't stay away. I'd seen too much death in the military to be afraid of it. I'd sat with dying sailors, held their hands, listened to their fears and regrets and last requests. Death doesn't scare me. It just is. One afternoon in late autumn, I sat with Daniel in his bedroom. He was too weak to leave the bed by then. Hospice had been called in. The end was close. He was drifting in and out of consciousness, the morphine keeping him comfortable but distant. I sat in the chair beside his bed, reading a book, just being present. He stirred, blinked, focused on me. Lena. I'm here. I need to tell you something. Okay. He struggled to gather his thoughts. I was jealous of you. For years. Jealous of what you became. I set my book down. Why? Because you did something real. Something that mattered. I just made money. That's not the same thing. I thought about arguing, about telling him his businesses employed people, provided value, mattered in their own way. But that felt like a lie. And there wasn't time for lies anymore. No, I said gently. It's not. He smiled faintly. You were always honest. Even when I didn't want you to be. Yeah, I'm proud of you. I should have said that more. You've said it enough. He closed his eyes. I don't think I did. I reached over and took his hand. It was cold, fragile. I heard you anyway. He squeezed my hand weakly. Then he drifted off again. He died 3 days later. Peacefully, according to the hospice nurse. My mother called me early in the morning. I was on base, about to head into a briefing. I stepped outside, stood in the cold November air, and let myself feel it. Sadness. Relief. Gratitude. Loss. All of it, tangled together. The funeral was small. family, a few close friends, some business associates. I gave the eulogy because my father couldn't, too emotional, and my mother asked me to. I stood at the podium and looked out at the small crowd and told the truth. Not the whole truth, funerals aren't the place for that, but a version of it that honored who Daniel had been and who he'd tried to become. My uncle was complicated, I said. He was brilliant and flawed, generous and difficult, proud and insecure. He lived loudly. He made mistakes. He hurt people he loved, not because he wanted to, but because he didn't know how not to. But he also tried. In the end, he tried to be better. And that effort matters. It doesn't erase the harm, but it matters. I looked at my mother in the front row. She was crying quietly, my father's arm around her. He was family, I continued. And family is complicated. We don't get to choose them. We don't get perfect versions of them. We get real people with all their mess and contradictions. And we have to decide what to do with that. I decided to forgive him. Not because he earned it, but because I didn't want to carry anger anymore. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about yourself. It's about choosing peace over resentment. Daniel taught me that, even if he didn't mean to. I paused, gathering my thoughts. The last thing he said to me was that he was proud of me. I think he spent years not knowing how to say that. Not knowing how to be proud of someone without making it about himself. But he learned. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful I got to hear it. I'm grateful we had time to rebuild something real before he ran out of time. I stepped down. People came up afterward to thank me, to hug me, to tell me it was a beautiful service. I accepted their condolences with grace, but part of me was already gone, already processing, already moving forward. That's the thing about loss. It doesn't stop you. It just changes you. And you keep moving because that's what living things do. The weeks after the funeral were strange. I felt his absence more than I expected to. Not because we'd been close, we hadn't, not really. But because he'd been a constant. A reference point. Even when we weren't talking, I knew he was there. Now he wasn't. That space he'd occupied, for better and worse, was just empty. My mother struggled more. She'd lost her brother-in-law, but more than that, she'd lost a connection to my father's family, to their shared history. She cried more than I'd seen her cry in years. My father held her through it, steady and quiet the way he always was. I took leave and stayed with them for a week. We didn't do much. Made meals. Watched TV. Sat in the garden. I answered emails in the evenings, but otherwise tried to be present. My mother appreciated it. You didn't have to come, she said one afternoon. Yes, I did, I replied. And I meant it. When I returned to work, I threw myself back into it with renewed focus. I had a major test program coming up, personnel reviews to complete, budget meetings that made me want to scream. The work was relentless, demanding, exhausting. And I was grateful for it. Grief needs space, but it also needs distraction. Work gave me both. Now, sitting here 15 years after that day on the tarmac, I can see the arc of it clearly. The confrontation. The boundary. The distance. The rebuilding. The loss. It all fits together in a way it couldn't have when I was living through it. Life makes sense in retrospect. In the moment, it's just chaos and decisions and hope that you're doing the right thing. I don't regret setting that boundary. I don't regret the years of distance. They were necessary. They protected me when I needed protection. They gave me space to become who I am now. And they taught Daniel something he needed to learn, even if he learned it too slowly. I also don't regret forgiving him. That was necessary too. Not for him, though it mattered to him, but for me. Anger is heavy. Resentment is exhausting. Forgiveness is freedom. Not the kind where you forget or condone, but the kind where you stop letting the past define your present. I'm a brigadier general now. I lead thousands of personnel. I make decisions that affect national security. I've earned respect in a system that doesn't give it easily. I've built a career I'm proud of, a life I'm proud of. And none of that would have happened if I'd stayed small to make other people comfortable. The young woman who stepped onto that jet 15 years ago didn't know that yet. She was still learning. Still figuring out where her boundaries were. Still believing that loyalty meant enduring mistreatment. She was doing her best with the tools she had. But she learned. She grew. And she became someone who doesn't apologize for taking up space. Someone who sets boundaries without guilt. Someone who walks away from dysfunction without looking back. Someone who forgives when it serves her, not when it's expected. That's who I am now. And I'm proud of her. Last week, I was cleaning out some old files and found a photo from that day. Someone had taken it on the tarmac, probably base security. It shows me standing between two F-22 Raptors, the sun behind me, my face calm and unreadable. I look small next to those aircraft. But I don't look diminished. I look like I belong there. I framed that photo. It sits on my desk now, next to my parents' wedding photo and a picture of my team from my last command. When I look at it, I don't think about Daniel's face collapsing. I think about the moment I stopped apologizing for who I'd become. The moment I stopped waiting for permission to be seen. That moment changed everything. Not because of the jets. Not because of the drama. But because it forced a truth into the open that had been buried for too long. I had outgrown the version of me that other people preferred. And I wasn't going back. I lean back in my chair, looking at that photo, and I smile. 15 years later, I'm still that woman. Still standing between the jets. Still refusing to be small. Still moving forward. And I'm not done yet. That's how everything unfolded, one moment of disrespect on a jet turning into the way-up call I didn't know I needed. Now I'm curious. Have you ever had someone underestimate you until the truth finally hit them in the face? Have you ever had to pull back your energy from someone who took it for granted? Drop your story below. I read every comment. And if you want more real, first-person stories about boundaries, self-worth, and choosing yourself, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs that reminder today. See you in the next one.